Thinking of planning the ultimate European ski trip? The first place that comes to mind might be Switzerland's Zermatt, which is lined by the iconic Matterhorn, making for an almost dreamy backdrop. Zermatt is boosted by one of the most picturesque towns in the world and a plainly humongous footprint. But when it comes to fundamentals like snow and terrain, how does it stack up? Well, in this video, we'll go through the broader Zermatt area's overall mountain experience, and then we'll go through how the first European ski resort we've ever reviewed stacks up in our overall rankings. If you find this information helpful, be sure to like and subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss any of our content. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter for crucial industry updates and other exclusive content you won't see in our videos. With that all being said, let's jump in. The first thing that stands out about Zermatt is just how stunning it is. With the Matterhorn bluntly prominent across nearly every resort area, there's no mistaking that you're skiing or riding alongside one of the world's most beautiful mountains. A significant majority of Zermatt's slopes are wide open, making for incredible views of the surrounding alpine area and the expansive mountain ranges. While it all looks fantastic, we'd argue that the most naturally beautiful part of the ski area is Matterhorn Glacier Paradise, which not only offers the closest views of the Matterhorn itself, but sits alongside a smattering of blue ice glaciers, making for some truly awe-inspiring slopes. The Italian side of the ski area has less iconic views of the Matterhorn and less favorable terrain aspects, but it is typically sunnier. Speaking of Italy, another standout feature of the broader Zermatt ski area is that visitors can ski or ride in between different countries. The full continuous footprint, known officially as Matterhorn Ski Paradise, actually includes 5 distinct areas. From skiers right to left, they include Sonniger Rothorn, Gornergrat, and Matterhorn Glacier Paradise on the Swiss side, and Cervinia and Valtournenche on the Italian side. Only the first 3 are formally part of Zermatt, while the latter 2 operate under different branding and issue their own tickets. That being said, visitors can buy tickets that encompass all 5 areas. Guests will want to head to the top of the ski area to ski or ride directly between Switzerland and Italy. The access points sit on a glacier that straddles the Matterhorn Glacier Paradise and Cervinia sectors. It's worth noting that the Icon Pass, which is popular with Americans, does not cover the Italian areas, so those holding this type of pass and using it to ski Zermatt will want to make sure to buy a separate lift ticket before skiing into Italy. Another outstanding aspect about Zermatt is just the sheer size of the skiable footprint. With 200 kilometers of slopes and over 9,000 acres from boundary to boundary just on the Swiss side, the resort dwarfs the vast majority of European competitors and pretty much every North American ski resort. If one includes the Cervinia and Valtournenche areas in Italy, the size expands to a whopping 322 kilometers, and if one includes the unmaintained yellow slopes on the Swiss side, the total slope length expands even further to 360 kilometers, or over 14,000 boundary-to-boundary acres. To put it into perspective, this is nearly twice the size of Park City, which is the largest ski resort in the United States. Zermatt also offers a world-class vertical drop, with a continuous top-to-bottom descent of up to 7,425 feet, one of the longest in the world, and by far the most reliably open of any inbounds descent that long. If coming from the Italian side, it takes at least 4 lifts to get from bottom to top. While the Swiss side does offer top-to-bottom service through 2 lifts, the first of these is a massive 4-stage gondola that takes 20 minutes to ride and travels over 4,200 vertical feet. But even outside of its natural beauty, Zermatt has an almost innumerable number of features that are just plain cool. First off, Zermatt might have one of the most impressive lift systems in the world. The Swiss side of the resort has high-speed lifts just about everywhere, including luxurious bubble chairs, gondolas, trams, and a specialty tri-cable lift to get to the top of the skiable resort. Some of these gondolas are so high-tech that they have automated welcome and stop announcements. For others, the entrances are so fancy that you get to ride up or down an escalator. The Italian Cervinia and Valtournenche sides do have some older and slower lifts, but guests will find impressive trams, gondolas, and bubble lifts there too, including a new tri-cable gondola from Cervinia to Zermatt that makes it much more direct to get to the top of Matterhorn Glacier Paradise. But it's not just ropeways that provide uphill transportation at Zermatt. Unlike nearly every other resort out there, Zermatt has some slopes that are directly served by train. The ski area has not just 1, but 2 distinct railways. The first of these is the Gornergrat Bahn Cog Railway, which extend over 4,800 vertical feet to a summit observation deck and boutique hotel. The railway runs right along some of the slopes, making for a sight to behold. It's worth riding the train to the summit at least once and heading to the observation platform. The views of the Matterhorn and surrounding glacier are more than worth it. There are some really good places to get pictures up here, although you might be competing with other tourists who have come to the same place with similar mindsets. The Gornergrat train typically runs on 24-minute headways, so you might be waiting a while, but all but 2 of its runs are served by other traditional lifts as well. The second of these railways is actually an underground funicular, providing access from downtown Zermatt to the Valtournenche part of the resort through a heavily inclined tunnel. The Zermatt-Zuniga funicular might be one of the most unique ways to get up a mountain anywhere, and if you're an infrastructure junkie, it's definitely worth a ride in either the front or back of the train to get a view of the tunnel. The train is surprisingly fast too, with a run speed of 2,360 feet per minute, which is more than twice the pace of a typical detachable chairlift or gondola. This train runs on 5-minute headways and the bottom terminal sits down a long hallway, so you'll want to be sure to arrive a few minutes before the train departs. But perhaps the most unique part of the Zermatt experience is the ice cave at the top of the resort. This glacier palace may have an unassuming elevator entrance within the top terminal of Matterhorn Glacier Paradise, but it is a must-visit attraction for any Zermatt visitor. The cave is surprisingly extensive, boasting incredible ice sculptures, pieces of Swiss history, and even an ice slide. But a truly well-rounded ski resort isn't just about features, and when it comes to the actual substance of its slopes, Zermatt starts to show its shortcomings. Perhaps Zermatt's biggest issue is its natural snow totals. The resort isn't exactly barren, but with accumulation totals at or just under 200 inches per year, the resort experiences snowfall numbers that fall well short of the best in Europe, and don't even come close to the serious destinations in the US and Canadian Rockies. The very high elevations in upper mountain areas do help preserve snow well, but mid and especially lower mountain areas tend to get icy and crusty, with conditions that might remind some North Americans of skiing on the East Coast more than anything else. Fairly widespread snowmaking does help keep slopes resilient, but the resort's popular trails get skied off really quickly, and guests will often need to stick to the sides of slopes to avoid icy conditions. The Italian side of the resort sees a lot more sun exposure than the Swiss side, so Cervinia and Valtournenche guests should expect more variable terrain cover, but softer snow in the afternoons. It's also worth noting that the slopes on the Italian side tend to be wider and less crowded, so they don't get skied out as quickly. One place where Zermatt does stand out, however, is in its summer operations. Since a sizable portion of Zermatt's upper mountain is located on a glacier, the broader ski area is able to offer skiing and riding well after the winter ends, with the highest portions of Matterhorn Glacier Paradise operating close to year-round, and some parts of Cervinia typically operating through September. The quantity of slopes available during these times is limited, and you can't use your Icon Pass to visit Zermatt during the summer, but it's a really cool opportunity to get some turns in when you realistically shouldn't be able to. The summer slopes are bolstered by snow farming and served by seasonal T-bars, and if you visit during the winter, you'll see the provisions for both of these. One repercussion of Zermatt's less than impressive snowfall totals is the quality of its on-piste advanced and expert terrain. The vast majority of reliably open runs are perennially groomed, and with more than 80% of marked pistes rated for beginners or intermediates, there is very little in the way of official challenge at the resort. Zermatt does have a handful of freeride trails marked in yellow that are not groomed or directly maintained, but conditions on these tend to be variable, to say the least, and some of them are rarely open. As one might expect from a resort of its size, Zermatt does have a vast chunk of off-piste terrain off its slopes. However, in typical years, most of this off-piste is rocky and not very skiable, especially on the Swiss side. The off-piste areas that are skiable involve an exponential increase in difficulty versus the resort's blacks and yellows, including some technical cliffs and narrow chutes. But the snow in these areas is very sketchy and inconsistent, and if it hasn't snowed in a while, it's usually much worse than any open trail within the resort. On the occasions when it has snowed in Zermatt, the resort's off-piste is not patrolled for avalanches at all, so make sure you have the proper training, equipment, and partner when you venture out of bounds because the avalanche danger is considerable. In addition, unless you really know what you're doing, steer clear of the off-piste in Zermatt's upper mountain areas. These heavily glaciated slopes may look tempting, but the risk of falling into crevasses is much higher than it looks. It's worth noting that the off-piste in Cervinia tends to be somewhat better covered and more approachable than that of Zermatt. If you want to explore the off-piste but don't have backcountry experience, consider hiring a guide in either Zermatt or Cervinia to take you there. While the broader Zermatt ski area isn't for tenured experts, it's not really for beginners either. The resort does offer some easier blue-rated beginner runs, but it's not exactly designed around them. Despite some solid mid-mountain beginner pods in the Zuniga Radtourn, Gornergrat, and Valtournenche sectors, there are no easier trails to get down to the bottom of the resort in any of these, meaning guests who aren't comfortable with the reds in these areas will need to download a lift to leave the resort. In fact, Cervinia is the only part of the ski area where guests can directly ski down to the bottom on beginner pistes. None of the beginner trails in these 4 sectors are interconnected by easier runs either, so visitors will have to take a red intermediate piste to get between them. Zermatt is really best for intermediate skiers and riders, and perhaps groomer-savvy advanced visitors as well. Over 2/3 of prepared pistes are intermediate red trails, with ample moderately sloped groomed cruisers across every mountain zone. In several sections of Matterhorn Glacier Paradise and Cervinia, red pistes provide the only options down, and in other sections of Gornergrat and Valtournenche, the black and yellow piste alternatives are so rarely open that the reds are the only practical trails to choose from. But while a significant majority of Zermatt's trails are rated as red, you might not figure it out for a while when trying to get around the ski area. The Matterhorn's large, complicated footprint is not easy to figure out, and signage could use a ton of work. Trail entry signs are quite small for the most part, and unless you're religiously studying the trail map, it's really difficult to find runs if you need to take multiple trail connections to get there. The trails themselves are primarily designated by numbers, and while they do have names, the already tiny signs leave most of the space for the numbers, resulting in small, difficult to read text for the trail names. On the Swiss side, there are an acceptable quantity of signs for lifts, resort sectors, and restaurants. However, these signs are uniformly red with small symbols indicating the type of destination, which can make it challenging to identify specific attractions. On the Italian side, there aren't always even signs to restaurants and lifts, so visitors will pretty much have to fend for themselves to find these amenities. The lack of adequate signage is exacerbated by the broader Zermatt ski area's convoluted intra-resort lift network. You wouldn't know some terrain zones existed if you didn't actively search for them. For example, there's no way to access the Hurley Bubble 6-pack chair if you don't get off at the second Matterhorn Express mid-station, which isn't exactly intuitive. In addition, getting to the Cielo Alto double lift, which is home to 2 of the mere 5 black trails in the Italian Cervinia zone, requires going up to mid-mountain, basically committing the trail map to memory due to a lack of signage, and taking a very specific set of trails down to the lift. This is all despite the zone being only less than 200 feet up from the base. The Swiss Zuniga Radtourn and Gornergrat zones aren't the best connected either, and guests either have to take a tram or cog railway to get from the former to the latter, making for longer headways than might be ideal for some guests. And it's not like one can easily transfer between these sides at the base either. The funicular, which provides the main access to Zuniga Radtourn, and the Matterhorn Glacier Express, which provides the main access to Gornergrat and Matterhorn Glacier Paradise, are about a 20-minute walk or 10-minute bus ride from one another in town. It's also worth noting that while Zermatt's heavily above treeline footprint makes for stunning views, it makes for tough visibility on storm days, with very few landmarks to help skiers and riders make their way through flat light conditions, although trail posts on the side of pistes do help guests avoid going out of bounds. Finally, ending up in the wrong place in the Matterhorn complex can have more consequences than at most ski areas. Ending up in the wrong place at the end of the day can be catastrophic. Not only is there no public transportation between the Swiss Zermatt and Italian Cervinia and Valtournenche bases, but getting between Switzerland and Italy after the slopes close takes over 3 hours by taxi and costs hundreds of euros, and that's if anyone is even willing to take you. Due to these circumstances, if you end up in the wrong country at the end of the day, you might as well pay for a hotel rather than try to get back prior to the following morning. Luckily, guidance to get back to Italy from Zermatt is much better than most of the other signage at the resort, with the Matterhorn Glacier Express warning Italian guests on the last available time to attempt to return to their side of the ski area. These return warnings do exist in parts of the Italian Cervinia area as well, but they aren't as prominent. As a result, guests intending to return to Switzerland after a day in Italy will need to be much more proactive about getting back. It's also worth noting that the region's upper mountain areas are highly wind exposed, and although the resorts try hard to avoid it, weather-related closures can occur midday, leaving guests stranded on one side or the other. The resorts do try to give guests a warning of around half an hour or so before these closures happen, but they can't always do this, so if the weather looks unfavorable on a particular day, it might be best to stick to your country of origin. But at least while getting around the footprint may be frustrating, lift lines are not a serious problem within the broader Zermatt region. Zermatt's considerable lift capacity, combined with limited lodging in town, means that most lift lines rarely exceed 5 minutes even during peak times. Waits can be longer at the lower capacity trams, but even at these, guests will rarely see the hour-long lines that are common at these types of lifts in parts of North America. When it comes to Zermatt's railways, the train consists are long enough that it's nearly unheard of for guests to not be able to load the first one that arrives. However, the lack of lift lines is countered by congestion issues on the slopes themselves, at least on the Swiss side. Most lifts only serve a handful of pistes, leading to lots of people on each run, meaning it's tough to carve out your own space on the trail. And if you're stuck behind someone, it's often hard to pass them because they're either using the whole slope or carving aggressively across the whole width of it. At least visitation is much lower on the Italian side, making lift lines and trail congestion over there extremely rare. Luckily, if you want to avoid the densely packed nature and icy conditions of Zermatt's slopes, there are plenty of options to stop in for a break, and they are absolutely fantastic. Both the Swiss and Italian sides are chock full of restaurants, with establishments at seemingly every junction, especially in Switzerland. The vast majority of these dining venues are independently owned, and not only do they boast their own unique flair and excellent quality food, but they also generally offer outdoor seating with world-class views of the surrounding slopes. Some of the particularly fancy restaurants, especially on the Swiss side, do require reservations, so be sure to plan ahead before stopping in for lunch on your trip to Zermatt. The one downside to these restaurants is that it's tough to find speedy food options, but a few more casual cafeterias do exist across the resort, primarily in the terminals of the Matterhorn Glacier Paradise lifts. It's also worth noting that the restaurants on the Italian side tend to offer better value for the quality of food you get. One additional benefit to Zermatt's independent on-mountain establishments is the quality of Aprés on its slopes. Especially on the Swiss side, many of the restaurants function primarily as bars, with great happy hour deals and awesome party vibes starting as early as right before lunch. The atmosphere isn't quite as crazy as at some ski areas in Austria, but there are still some really great venues for a lively atmosphere. If Aprés is calling your name, be sure to check out the Henu stall off the Klein Matterhorn Express, which offers live music, DJs, and excellent happy hour deals. If you want to do a more casual bar crawl, head to the number 2 piste on the Zuniga side, where there are 4 slopeside bars in a row. Once you finish a drink at one, you can head down to the next one. The Italian Cervinia and Valtournenche areas aren't as known for their on-mountain Aprés, but most of the restaurants do serve drinks and occasionally host larger parties. Once you make it off the slopes, perhaps the biggest upside of Zermatt is its town. Zermatt might be one of the greatest ski towns in the world, with incredible mountain-influenced architecture, a walkable setup with no private cars, and unbelievable views of the Matterhorn towering above. Lodging options range from budget hostels to 5-star hotels, so there's really something for everyone. While some of the hotels and restaurants are a bit of a trek from the lifts, Zermatt does run a free electric bus service throughout town, although at the beginning and end of the ski day, these buses can get packed, and you may have to wait for 1 or 2 of them to pass by before squeezing on. The village of Zermatt's extensive restaurant scene includes top-tier options of various international cuisines. We especially enjoyed the pizza, fondue, and schnitzel we tried, but there are even some types of cuisine you wouldn't expect, including Asian and Mexican options. If you have a sweet tooth, be sure to check out the bakeries in town, which offer the absolutely incredible fruit and chocolate products that Switzerland is known for. If the Aprés on the slopes isn't good enough, Zermatt keeps the party going through the night, with plenty of bars and clubs in the village. Some of these establishments really go hard, with live music and dancing that can stay open through up to 5 a.m. If you decide to stay in Cervinia, you won't get the same views or nightlife as in Zermatt, but you'll get a more low-key vibe and better food for the price, and you can also drive in the village. Valtournenche is a significantly smaller town and much more low-key than Cervinia, and to be honest, there isn't much to do there after a day on the slopes. Access to Zermatt is through train only. The village is just under 4 hours from the Geneva airport, and the train spits you right into town, with most accommodations within walking distance or a short bus ride of the station. If you're coming from Geneva, you need to make a transfer between trains in Visp, and the connection time can be tight, so be sure you're able to either quickly make it to your connecting platform, or you're okay with waiting around in Visp for a while. On the other hand, there are no train services directly to Cervinia or Valtournenche, and you have to take a bus or car to either Italian town. The closest major airport to Cervinia is Milan, which takes about 2.5 hours by car or shuttle, and about 4 hours by public transportation. So Zermatt is not for powder hounds or those who are looking for a remotely serious challenge on their next ski trip. But if you're in it for the town, après, sheer footprint size, and stunning groomers, the ski area is hard to beat. If you're choosing between Zermatt and Cervinia, Zermatt has better lift infrastructure, more favorable terrain aspects, and significantly more iconic views of the Matterhorn, while the Italian side has less crowded pistes and more down-to-earth vibes. Ultimately, the broader Zermatt ski area is pretty mediocre when it comes to the quality of its ski terrain, but as a tourist destination, few other ski resorts are more memorable. Lift tickets to Zermatt Cervinia are pricey for Europe, but they're still much more reasonable than most US destinations. If you just want to stick to one of these countries, tickets go for discounted rates with much cheaper access if you just stick to the Italian side. Tickets do not include services from Ski Patrol in case you need to be rescued. If you do want to add insurance, it's an extra 5 francs per day, which in our view is well worth the cost. Now let's go through how Zermatt Cervinia stacks up in our overall rankings, which are determined by the following 10 category mountain score. Zermatt does see some powder days, but its raw snow totals fall well short of the best European ski areas, and the region gets a 6 for snow. Zermatt regularly gets icy and sometimes sees weather holds in upper mountain areas, and some of its harder slopes are not consistently open or in good condition throughout the course season. However, summer skiing is a major feature, and the ski area gets a 6 for resiliency overall, retaining that 6 for resiliency on the Swiss side alone, but dropping to a 5 on the Italian side, which has a shorter summer season and less favorable exposure aspects. The broader Zermatt ski area offers a whopping 360 kilometers of ski slopes when fully open, and over 14,400 acres from boundary to boundary, 9,100 of which are in Switzerland and 5,300 of which are in Italy, earning the ski area a 10 for size overall, retaining that 10 for size on the Swiss side and earning it a 9 on the Italian side. The broader Zermatt area has a ton of terrain zones with diverse views, but the vast majority of its runs are intermediate groomers, and the ski area gets a 6 overall for terrain diversity, with the score going down to 5 for each of the individual Swiss and Italian sides. Zermatt does have a few freeride zones and some skiable off-piste if you know what you're doing, but for the most part, even remotely difficult terrain is hard to come by, and the resort gets a 4 for challenge, with the score dropping to 3 on the Italian side, which has no freeride terrain at all. Zermatt offers one of the best lift systems in the world, with the Swiss side offering a fully high-speed setup and just plain cool gondolas, trams, and trains. The Italian side has a mix of these modern lifts as well as some slower chairs, and the ski area gets a 9 for lifts overall, a 10 for lifts on just the Swiss side, and a 6 for lifts on just the Italian side. Lift lines at Zermatt are rarely that bad, but trail congestion can be a significant issue, and the resort gets a 7 for crowd flow, with the score increasing to 8 on the lower capacity but less busy Italian side. Zermatt's on-mountain restaurant scene is incredible, with world-class dining and views around what seems like every corner, and the resort gets a 10 for facilities both overall and on the Swiss side, although the score drops to 8 on the Italian side, which does not have quite the same restaurant scene, although it's still pretty impressive. Zermatt is a large, complicated mountain, and its unintuitive signage doesn't help the fact. The resort is saved from our worst possible rating by the generally clear guidance on how to get between Switzerland and Italy at the end of the day, but the resort still only gets a 2 for navigation. And finally, mountain aesthetic. And well, you get to Zermatt for the views of the Matterhorn, and the Swiss side and resort overall get an easy 10 in this category, although the score drops to 8 on the less iconic Italian side. These categories add up to an overall score of 70 both overall and on the Swiss side, and a score of 16 for just the Italian regions. At this point, it's kind of hard to compare Zermatt to other European mountains since it's the first one we've ever reviewed, but here's how it stacks up against some of the popular US and Canada destinations. Zermatt knocks it out of the park when it comes to lifts, facilities, and views, and it's a lot less crowded than some of the notoriously busy resorts in North America, but snow and terrain just are not competitive with the destinations across the pond. If you're looking for a so-called lifestyle ski vacation, Zermatt is a fantastic choice, but if you want to get some raw, big mountain skiing in on your next trip, you should probably go somewhere else. For more information on Zermatt and over 100 ski resort destinations, check out peakrankings.com. See you for the next one.